If you're going to replace the wheel bearing, it's a good idea to buy a kit, like one's Pelican sells. Otherwise, you're going to have to go and source all the parts separately. With the caliper and disc removed, you will be looking at the wheel hub. If you are not looking at this, then please see the link at the end of this video on brake caliper and rotor removal first. Remove the dust cap from the front of the wheel hub. You will need to gently pry and tap the cap off using a large flathead screwdriver, red arrow. Rotate the hub as you do this to help the cap come off evenly. With the dust cap removed, you can see the axle nut that sits in the center, as indicated by the red arrow. It's a good idea to wipe off any excess grease on the nut. Do not go overboard with the grease application. Use a 5mm Allen key, red arrow, and loosen the clamp on the axle nut. This clamp holds the axle nut in place on the spindle. Once you loosen the clamp, you should be able to easily unthread the nut from the spindle. Remove the outer tapered roller bearing, red arrow. Pull the hub, red arrow, off the spindle, yellow arrow. Clean all the grease off the spindle, red arrow, and check for wear as well. If the spindle shows any grooves or pitting, you want to replace it. Another note about grease. People tend to grease the spindle. You don't need to do that, as the bearing is designed with an inner race that sits on the spindle. The bearing should turn around the races and not rotate around the spindle. With the wheel hub removed from the car, turn it over to its backside. You will see an oil seal pressed inside, as indicated by the red arrow. First, you'll need to remove this seal to remove the inner bearing and the race. Use a seal puller to remove the old seal from the wheel hub. If you don't have a seal puller, you can use a large flathead screwdriver and something to give you leverage. It will take a fair amount of force to pry the old seal from the hub, so don't be afraid to use a little force. The old seal will bend and deform as you pull it out. These are designed as one-time use only items. You will more than likely destroy it as it comes out. Remove the inner tapered bearing, red arrow. There is enough grease in this hub to do several cars worth of bearing replacements, yellow arrow. Clean the inside of the hub and check the condition of the races. They should both be clean and smooth with no signs of scoring, heat damage, or grooves. If you are replacing the bearings, you should change the races out as well. You can remove the outer race, yellow arrow, with a press and the inner race with a punch, red arrow. You can remove the outer race with a socket and hammer. You will want to apply an even force to all sides of the race when removing, but I prefer to use a press. If you have a press, it is best to use it, as this will keep even pressure side to side. Even pressure is important when removing or installing races. Find the right size socket, in our case 30mm, and press the old race out. When installing a new race, take it out of the freezer and press it back into place, making sure the tapered side is facing correctly. For the larger race on the opposite side, you'll have to use a small socket or a large punch and hit the edge of the race at an angle. It helps to hit the race around the diameter of the edge to drive it out evenly, red arrow. You will not be able to get a large enough socket inside the hub to apply even pressure during removal, so take your time and constantly rotate the hub to remove the race as evenly as possible. Patience is a virtue here. You need to make sure you do not damage or scratch the inside bore of the wheel hub. Take the new inner race bearing and place it in the bore of the rear of the hub. Mercedes-Benz makes an expensive tool to seat the race, but you should be able to find a socket large enough to use to press the race in. I found an old ball joint socket that fit perfectly. You'll want to position the tapered section to accept the bearing, red arrow. Now press the bearing race into the hub until it seats against the bottom flange of the hub. If you're having to do this with a hammer, Take your time and make sure that the race goes in straight. It's very easy to cock the race in the bore. Yet another word about grease. The packet of grease that comes with the kit is all the grease you need to install the two bearings. Grease is only needed on the races and the bearings. If you're going to use a bearing packer, you will need more grease than this to load up the packer, but you do not need to apply a greater volume of grease than that is in this package. Before installing the bearings into the wheel hub, it is necessary to pack them with grease. The idea here is to fill all the open spaces of the needle bearing. There are a couple of different ways to do this. You can buy a wheel bearing packer, which uses pressure to push the grease in from the open ends. If you are doing it by hand, push grease in through the openings on the ends, red arrow, until the grease comes out the other end. Then rotate the bearing back and forth. I highly recommend getting a bearing packer. Pelican Parts sells a few different ones. They are cheap, very effective at packing the bearings with grease, and make what might be one of the messiest jobs in all of motorsports clean and easy. Be sure to also put a coat of grease on the face of the bearing race, as indicated by the red arrow. Once the bearing is packed, drop it in place on the hub. It's not a bad idea to hold the inner part of the needle bearing and then turn the hub to distribute more grease throughout the bearing. Clean any grease that may be on the inner races of the bearing, red arrow. You want the bearing to spin in the race, not the races to spin on the spindles. Clean up any grease you may have gotten on the outer surface of the hub where the oil seal fits. Center the seal in the bore and carefully tap the oil seal into place, taking care that the seal does not get cocked in the bore on the wheel hub, red arrow. Keep tapping the seal until it bottoms out in the bore. Now fit the wheel hub back over the spindle and push it back until the seal pops over the flange on the back of the spindle. Install the freshly packed outer bearing, keeping in mind that the tapered section of the bearing fits into the race facing inward, red arrow. You'll need to now adjust the wheel bearing. While all bearings should be set with a dial gauge and holder, the truth of the matter is most DIY mechanics do not own or know how to properly use this equipment. If you do, please adjust your bearing accordingly. If you are contemplating doing this without it all I can write is that adjusting bearings is really a matter of feel and experience. You should tighten the clamping nut until you feel all of the play between the bearings gone. The hub should still turn, but should not spin freely. Once you're happy with the bearings set, the last step is to use a hammer and lightly tap the cap back into place. Thanks for watching. Click here to view the original article, along with hundreds of other DIY content for your car.